Hey guys, it's Dean. Welcome to Manful Yoga. In this video, I'm going to talk about one of my previous bad habits that I managed to break and how I did that. So I used to have I would not say it was a huge issue, but I would say a significant issue with eating junk food. And you might not think that, but something that you might not know about a lot of us fitness people is that we have the same desires as people who are less successful with their fitness programs. We have the same desire to eat junk food. A lot of us exercise solely so we can eat more junk food. But I struggled with eating junk food in the past, but it was something that I was able to pretty much get rid of entirely. And I'm going to tell you what I did in this video to make that happen. So before I get started, make sure to subscribe to this channel. We put out awesome content on a weekly basis. And if you like any of this video, be sure to hit the thumbs up button. It's a huge help. So in this video, here's what I'm going to talk about. First, I'm going to talk about environment design. And this is what I did in my home. This is how I altered my surroundings in my home to make it so that I didn't eat junk food. After that, I'm going to talk about the science of craving. So after I talk about the example of the craving with junk food, I'm going to talk about the science behind that and how my actions reflected kind of a general overview of craving and behavior that results from that. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the long-term effects of environment design. So I'm going to talk about kind of the unintended consequences of what happened when I made it impossible to eat junk food in my home. And it actually made it so that I no longer eat junk food in almost any setting. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, I no longer eat junk food in almost any setting. And it starts it started because I realized all the negative outcomes of eating junk food. And I'll talk about that as well. So first off, environment design. So if you're new to this whole habit thing or learning about habits, this is something that I'm really passionate about. I actually am hosting a challenge right now. If it's January 2020, I'm hosting a challenge right now called the Build a Habit Challenge on my website, manfulyoga.com. You can learn more about that in the description below. But building habits and getting rid of bad habits is something that is very important to me. Most of what we do is subconscious. Or automatic behaviors. 40 to 50% of what we do is out of habit. And then from there, most of what we do stems from our habits. So it's even more than 50% of what we do is based on our habits. And then indirectly, even more of that is based on our habits. So the first part of kind of changing our behaviors is environment design. And this means that we alter our surroundings in order to discourage bad habits and to encourage good habits. Now, in the context of junk food, eating junk food at home, this was really simple and really easy to do, or at least easy to do in the sense that taking the action to design your environment to prevent yourself from eating junk food was really easy. All I did was throw out all my junk food, or I just stopped purchasing junk food. So in my house, I didn't have any cookies. I didn't have any sweets. I didn't have candy. And that was the first step in environment design, making it impossible to engage in your bad habits. So if I did want to have junk food, I would have to go to the grocery store. I'd have to walk to the market, I'd have to walk to the nearby market, and I'd have to actually buy junk food. And by the time I realized I wanted junk food and realized how much effort it would take to actually go get junk food, I had time to reconsider. And I was able to think, well, what if you just had like an apple instead? Or what if you just had something else instead? And so the first part of what environment design did was that it kind of retrained my behavior. So instead of having a craving to eat junk food and then eating junk food, I would have that craving. I would then realize that eating junk food was really inconvenient. And then I would search for another behavior that was an alternative, but also was less harmful, but also fulfilled kind of the same craving. So there are two things that I did. The first alternative was drinking mineral water with lime. Often when I had a craving for junk food, I was really just thirsty. So I would have some Topo Chico. If you don't know what Topo Chico is, it's delicious. It's a mineral water that's very common here in Texas. but I would have some Topo Chico, I would mix in some lime juice, and I would drink that. And then after 10 minutes or so, I usually felt fine. And I realized that I didn't really need sugar. And then if I still had a craving for sugar, I would eat an apple or I would eat some fruit. And the reason why this worked is because what my body really wanted was sugar. It didn't necessarily need the junk food, the sugar from junk food. It just wanted sugar in general. And this is going to lead me into my next part of this video, which is talking about the science of cravings and how you can use that understanding to kind of change your behavior. So in this example, what I was doing wasn't necessarily eliminating the behavior. What I was doing was replacing one behavior with another behavior. So when your brain experiences a craving, what happens is it searches your past experiences for ways to address that craving. And it doesn't think of the most healthy options. It doesn't think of the most, it doesn't think of the most logical or long-term beneficial option. It thinks, what is the most exaggerated experience that I have had that has satisfied this craving? And is that available? So in this case of a sugar craving, your body or your brain jumps straight to, where can I get a piece of candy? Or is there a cookie nearby? Can I have some ice cream? It jumps straight to the most exaggerated version of a sugar source, and that typically is junk food. Now, when you have that desire and you want that junk food, but then you realize that it's not as easily accessible, your brain then searches for alternate behaviors, or it weighs the pros and cons of the energy required to fulfill that, to do that particular behavior. So at this point, you have two options. One, do you go to the grocery store, or do you go outside your house and buy junk food from a gas station or a grocery store or whatever's closest? Or number two, do you say, it's too hard, let me do something else that has a similar benefit that will help satisfy this reward? Or number three, do you just ignore the craving altogether? So normally in those situations, if you're hungry and you're at home, you're probably not going to ignore it altogether. But what you can do is use that kind of timing, use that realization that it's too hard to engage in the behavior that you want to get rid of, which is eating junk food, and you can make another decision to engage in another behavior. And this is where I thought, okay, I'm hungry, I want sugar, but I don't want junk food, it's too hard to get. So instead, I'm going to have an apple, or I'm going to have a Topo Chico with lime. And so what I was doing here was rewiring the habit. I wasn't necessarily getting rid of the habit of eating junk food altogether, or eating food with sugar in it to relieve a craving. Instead, I was replacing a bad behavior with a more desirable behavior, one that alleviated the craving but didn't have the negative outcomes. So this is something important to understand with improving your habits. We aren't always getting rid of the habit. Rather, we are rewiring behavior. We are replacing one behavior with another behavior. So the habit stays in place. We're just replacing the behavior involved in that habit. And then lastly, I want to talk about the long-term kind of unintended consequences of making junk food not available in my home. So after a few weeks of not having junk food in my home, I realized that I could indeed live without junk food, and I had developed alternatives. I was having apples, I was having Topo Chico when I wanted junk food, or instead of having junk food when I experienced those cravings. But what I didn't realize was that there were a lot of negative outcomes of eating junk food, which I had just not noticed when I was regularly eating junk foods. And I only discovered these negative outcomes, or really experienced them, when I would be out in public and I'd have the opportunity to eat junk food. So let's say I was out at a bar, or I was out for dinner, and someone offered me junk food. Now, in that situation, because I hadn't had any when I was at home, I had less willpower to say no in those public situations. And sometimes even I would be peer pressured into eating food. Sometimes I honestly think, okay, yes, I'm fitness oriented, but I'm not a crazy person, so I'm going to eat junk food from time to time. What happened when I did eat junk food, after not having junk food at home for weeks, was that I started to realize that there were negative outcomes from eating junk food. So 15, 20, maybe 30 minutes after having, some junk food, maybe it was a dessert, maybe it was a cookie, maybe it was French fries, I would feel physically ill somehow. I would get a headache if I had too much sugar at once, or if I had a dessert. My stomach would hurt. I would notice a big decrease in energy, like I hit a wall. I would notice that I was having more exaggerated sugar cravings. And so what happened was basically I was hypersensitive to these negative effects, and that led to me kind of creating a new association in my brain of the outcomes of eating junk food. So instead of before, when it was eat junk food, alleviate craving, enjoy the junk food, and then just go back to what you're doing, my body was hypersensitive to the negative effects. And so now it was eat junk food, enjoy it for 3 seconds, 15 minutes later, feel like crap. So now I had this, now I associated junk food with feeling physically crappy. And so that's made it so that I really didn't want junk food. The whole idea of eating junk food, I would instantly think of, yeah, you could have that and it would taste good for 3 seconds, but you're gonna feel like crap in 30 minutes. So by eliminating the junk food at home, that led to me realizing that I don't really feel that good when I'm eating junk food. And now the only way that I'll eat junk food is if it's really good junk food. So if it's just like potato chips, if it's just, something that you can, usually if it's just something that you can get at the store, that's just a generic brand, I won't have it. Okay, if I'm in a fancy restaurant, or if I'm somewhere where like, Dean, this is a handcrafted chocolate cake. We only make it once per year. It's amazing. Yes, I'm gonna eat that cake. But if it's something that's just normal, if it's something that is, ordinary or not remarkable, I'm not gonna eat it because it's not worth the negative feelings that I get after eating it. So I'm gonna summarize all this for you in a second, but before I do that, if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe. I'm gonna be talking more about how some personal experiences of how I got rid of bad behaviors, how I built better behaviors, and also talking just about the science and give you steps to building better behaviors of your own. But the summary here, number one, I used environment design to prevent myself from eating junk food, to make it inconvenient to eat junk food. Number two, this helped me to develop, I was able to replace eating junk food with less harmful behaviors that still satisfied the craving for sugar. Number three, without that usual exposure to junk food, I developed a negative association between junk food and pleasure. So now I realized, oh, it just makes me feel bad instead of making me feel good. Now, is this the way that all habits work? Maybe not, or definitely not. It's not how all habits work. You might not have the same experience that I did if you get rid of junk food and do this exact same things that I did. It varies from person to person, and it varies from habit to habit. The habit itself, whether or not you can break it or how best to address it, depends on which component of the habit is most vulnerable. Is it easier to make it so that you don't notice the cue that triggers the habit? Is it easier to make it so you can't engage in the habit, so that you do environment design? Or is it easier if you address the motivation or the reward aspect involved in the behavior? It all depends on the behavior itself, on the habit itself, and also on your personal factors. If you want to learn more about this, I'm hosting that Build the Habit Challenge right now. You can learn more about it at manfulyoga.com/BTH. I'd also highly recommend 3 books on habits, on the science of habits, and they each include practical steps to building better habits, and they've been hugely helpful for me. The first is Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. The second is the Atomic Habits by James Clear. And then the third one is Tiny Habits by BJ Fogg, which was just released this year. So I urge you to check out all of those. All right, guys, thanks for watching this video. Again, subscribe and hit the like button if you haven't already, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one.